Hello and welcome to SOC Unlocked, Tales from the Cybersecurity Front Line. I'm Mick Leach, your host and guide on this exciting journey into the SOC universe. Of course, in each episode, I chat with various cybersecurity professionals about the latest in industry news, emerging threats, practical strategies to keep your organization safe, and much more. And this week, I am really excited to have a dear friend and colleague here at Abnormal, Piotr. Piotr, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's so great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Pio, can you tell us a little bit about your current role and how it shapes your organization's security strategy?
Absolutely. So I'm currently my role is I'm working for Abnormal AI. I'm the head of threat intel and platform. So it's a very interesting mix because usually threat intelligence teams are somehow embedded inside of the internal security teams, or they're somehow embedded into the R&D side of the house where it's kind of behind the product. For me, it's a bit of a mix. So it's a hybrid of both. So I support both the internal security program under our CIO here, as well as work very closely and partner with very closely with the product R&D teams, and pretty much make sure that everything that Abnormal does, by definition, also has the threat intelligence embedded in that. And as we do a lot of stuff with AI, that is a very interesting intersection because by definition, kind of threat intelligence has been very human-led, I think, and very known bad driven. So the principle behind it is like, that there's something bad about a technique, tool, threat actor, and you kind of take that and you do research and you understand more about the campaign, cluster, threat actors, et cetera, et cetera. And Abnormal, on the other hand, is very focused on the principle of known good. So known good modeling and then looking for anything that is outside of the norm is more what our models and products and AI capabilities are focusing on. So marrying the two of those worlds between the known bad modeling that threat intelligence brings and the known good modeling really allows us to kind of bring that together and kind of elevate the ability to detect what threat actors do on a daily basis in everything that we do.
That is awesome. I love that approach. I'm intrigued, candidly, in terms of known good. To your point, I've done threat intelligence for a long time, being SOC leader and those kinds of things. We work very closely with in using threat intel. But again, to your point, that's always been sort of defining what evil look like, and then trying to find that definition in our logs, whether that's a hash value or a reputation, these kinds of things, right? A bad IP address, those kinds of things. So I'm intrigued how that's done in terms of defining known good in the threat actor space. So what does that look like?
Yeah, so to your point, and it's actually a really good point, right? Like I think like from a security operations center standpoint, SOC analyst standpoint, very often intelligence is more focused around specific indicators. And as you triage the alerts, as you see the activity, you try to seek enrichment and intelligence to make the decision whether something that you see is good or bad. And that could be in the form of a simple enrichment, that could be in the form of a report, that could be in the form of like seeing that this indicator is correlated to another indicator. I think where we kind of marrying those two worlds together is that on the product and Abnormal specific side, the modeling of known good really comes down to the behavior and understanding the behavior. So if, for instance, we have, I like to say that like from the attribution standpoint, what Abnormal does from a product and known good standpoint is really understanding that like, hey, a user Bob in finance, this is the typical behavior and typical baseline for that user in terms of email communication, who they speak to, who they talk to, et cetera, et cetera. And then the ultimate attribution in that space comes down to like, hey, email from Sarah to Bob is not normal. It's abnormal. Therefore, we should kind of look at it and do something about that. From intelligence standpoint, attribution is a lot more about like, okay, I have a hash. That hash is associated with a malware file. That malware file has a specific fingerprint that I can then attribute to a specific threat group. And I know that every time I see this tool, this is associated with this threat group. So if we marry those two worlds, if we're able to pretty much surface up that, hey, for the behavior of a specific individual, there's something abnormal about this behavior, that pretty much gives us a bit of there's something here for us to look at. And then that ultimately allows us to then pretty much bring the insights from the intelligence world to be like, okay, cool. is there something about this that is associated with any of the known bad signals that we know about? And then we can kind of like pretty much combine the two to then allow our models to make a better determination about is that associated with specific threat, a specific tool, specific technique, etc. And ultimately, it's really about helping the models to become a lot more nuanced in how they make determination. Because, for instance, me sending you an email with a screen connect attached to it, if I'm your IT support person, that's going to be okay. Me being, a finance person trying to send you a screen connect, pretending to be an invitation to a Teams call, probably not, right? So it's kind of an example where we can marry those two and really understand the behavior and the intent behind the behavior a lot at a lot deeper sorry, I'm missing words here. We can understand it on a much deeper level.
Gotcha, gotcha. I love this because it reminds me of kind of the old days of NDR, network detection and response. Do you remember these days? Like back in the old snort days when we would write these rules that would define activity in like our network firewall logs or network logs and say, I want you to spot anomalous activity in terms of volume, in terms of port usage, these kinds of things. And then later with like Bro, which became Zeek, we were doing much the same thing, but you couldn't really do that outside of the network space because none of the other logging that we had available to us in our applications was as rigidly defined as network logs, right? Or firewall logs. Those were so well defined and we knew exactly what data was contained in what fields that we could write those kinds of rules. You could never do that in the application space until just recently, right? Because the logging was application logging. Goodness gracious, every vendor could write it however they wanted, and then they would routinely move things around within their logs, right? You would spend all this time writing, a sim rule or whatever, looking for X period of, X amount of data in this field, only to find that they shifted it, and now that value is in a different field, and it broke the sim rule. Man, it used to drive me crazy. But now, to your point, with now that machine learning has kind of grown up and matured, compute got a little bit cheaper, storage is cheap. Now we can suddenly throw these kinds of application logs, completely unstructured application logs, into a machine learning model and go, hey, baseline this and tell me when you see something unusual. And it can.
Yeah.
Like that's so cool.
Yeah, it really is. And then in addition, even to what you described, then we have the entire world of LLMs that can kind of act as the layer on top to really help with the decision process and understanding and deriving even more understanding, and then instrument the models to perform even more detailed analysis of what is happening. So it's not really about like a single flow of like, okay, from data to model to decision end of the process. It becomes a lot more of a circle, right? In which we can be like, hey, data, model, maybe some sort of LLM that can actually inform the models about the changes that needs to happen. And then that ultimately kind of like, through multiple iterations leads to a much better decision at the end of the day. So that shift from kind of linear to more circular process definitely made a big change of what is available. And obviously with the adoption of cloud and SaaS and the verbosity of the logs, there's so much data that obviously, for human to be able to vet that data, there's got to be a better way.
Yeah, it's like living in the future, man. This is so cool. But it occurs to me with your role in threat intel, and this isn't your first role in threat intel. That's not how you get to be a head of threat intel, is the first timer. So you've done this kind of work for a good period of time. So what I know about that is you have to have some stories, right? That you have to have come across some things. Can you, and I don't want to get anybody in trouble. No one wants to go to jail or get sued. Most of all me. So protecting the names of the innocent, and worse yet, the guilty. Can you tell us some stories or an example of something you've come across in your threat intel hunts where maybe you got to the attribution, maybe you've pinned it down to a threat actor, and what happened?
Yeah. Well, I think this, I don't want to say like, oh, there's so many, but I think I was really I used to work with some phenomenal people. I used to work with some I work both on the incident response teams, I work on the threat hunting teams, and I work with threat intelligence teams pretty much in either of those. And then I ultimately became also part of threat intelligence team and threat research team at a later stage of my career. So between that, I was extremely lucky, work with phenomenal and extremely smart folks. And there's a bunch of stories that are not only my stories, it's just stories from like being in the trenches with those folks. So yeah, there's like a number of different examples comes to mind, but it's kind of from like silly stories to like really, really cool stories. So I can give you an example of a super silly story, from one of our engagements is, how in the world of like ransomware, people have this tendency of like, oh, pull the plug. You need to pull the plug so you can like kind of limit the isolate the network. And we were one time engaged by a big hospital in the US. And they were under ransomware where like our security folks pulled the plug, we're completely shut down. It was, I think, 24 hours in. And we came in, we started investigating, and I just don't see the obvious ransomware stuff. Like, just going for this, going to the patient zero where the person apparently saw that the files on the desktop started changing their name. So the files got, the reason why they pulled the plug is that the files on the desktop started changing the extensions, and like the files started being changed to different names. So I was like, okay. So we started looking into that, and then that system, there was no ransomware indication, but the origin of that activity actually happened from a network share. So we went into the network share, we investigated that, and it turns out that the TLDR story is like, it wasn't ransomware. It was an old timer, an old virus that was just doing the simple change of the file names. But the funny thing about that is that they used to have an old legacy AV tool in place, and that legacy AV could not remove the virus from the network share, but it was able to block it from spreading. But then they were undergoing the project of replacing the AV and bringing the EDR in. And once they ripped the AV out, that's when the file, where there was no block in place. So it started just like mutating the files. And it wasn't encrypting them, it wasn't causing any harm. But the indication of that was the exact same to what people would consider ransomware to be like. So the hospital went down for like two, I think almost 3 days, uh, because of like simple virus from probably like 1980s that was just living on a network share that no one could remediate. So that was like that's like a silly story. But the cool, I think one of the I was really, I think, blessed in many ways that I got to work on a lot of nation state cases, whether it was Russian nation states or Chinese nation states, and I think like it's one of the cool stories that I can share is that like um we were involved in an investigation from an old breach. Let's say it was 4 or 5 years after, and the organization that was initially targeted actually sold a number of companies. So they were independent companies, but because 4 years ago they were connected, all of those companies were actually breached. So we went in and we started investigating the first case, and it was like, oh, we see this thing originating from this system, and we were like, oh, this used to be our domain controller that connected to this thing. I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then we started like pretty much seeing indication of specific malware implant that was attributed to a Chinese nation state and specific indicators. And through research, we actually identified that there were other connections to that, to the infrastructure associated with the Chinese nation state that were coming from those other organizations. So pretty much we had to go and be like, hey, remember that company that used to own you? Like, own you 4 years ago? They actually own you. So now we have to come and help you. So it was kind of like a mix of like going like to each, new entity and kind of working with them through and pretty much piecing together the intrusion like 4 or 5 years after from 3 separate networks with 3 independent entities to kind of one holistic story. So it's just like a bit of a twist on a typical IR. But yeah, I think like because we had a very extensive threat intelligence team. I used to work at CrowdStrike, and it's one of their threat hunting team, hands down, is probably the best in the world. Their threat intelligence team is top notch. I think that there was so much richness of information that allowed us to make determination about whether that was associated with threat actor X or Y or nation state A, B, C, whatever. The famous DNC case, 2016, not to get into politics, I think it's publicly known that CrowdStrike was involved in response to that. So there was a lot behind the scenes that that allowed people to make determination why that was attributed back to Russian nation state. So a lot of those cases were extremely cool, and even being partially involved in those, it was like the one of the little highlights of my career.
That is so cool. That is so cool. So, first, my question is, did you ever get to weigh in because you were part of the threat intel team at CrowdStrike? Did you ever get to weigh in on the naming?
No,
Do you lay claim to any of those scattered spider, like Fancy Panda? Like,
no, unfortunately not. So I do believe, if I remember correctly, maybe some of my CrowdStrike friends can correct me, but I do remember that the person who actually, you know, discovers the threat actor gets to name the threat actor. So yeah, I didn't get a chance to. I don't have the privilege of doing that.
oh, that's that because I would just want to know which one did you pick, right? Fancy Bear. There's lots of really good ones.
I don't think I would be allowed to pick one because of it'll be stupid probably. Pierogi Panda to be like a Polish team, and I'll be like, no, go away.
I love it. I love it. Piotr got banned from naming things at CrowdStrike. No, it's funny. The silly one that you mentioned at the beginning actually hit really close to home for me. I at a previous company, we had a similar case where we had a laptop that got struck by ransomware. This was a similar ransomware in that the irony was that it actually didn't actually encrypt anything. It did change the name to like a .enc or something along those lines. That made you believe that it was encrypted, but the files themselves weren't actually encrypted. They just were renamed. So it was like a simple rename script. But the problem was it hit that box, and that box had mounted a file share as an actual like lettered drive. And it followed that file share, that mount point to the file share, and then proceeded to not encrypt, but rename hundreds of thousands of critical business files and broke a ton of things. And we all were like, well, I mean, there's good news. It's not actually encrypting anything. What we learned, the bad news was just a simple rename script, right? Just in Python that would simply rename the files to what they used to be named was easier to write than restoring the files from backup. And yet, that took so long. It was like 32 hours to run to actually complete its job. So even though nothing was actually encrypted, it still caused 32 hours worth of impact. And we were there for something like 54 hours nonstop, like straight working through the incident. So also kind of silly and yet devastatingly impactful for as silly as it was.
It's silly and it's not silly because when you get to that point of like actually having a conversation with the decision makers about what happened, they made a decision to like, hold the network down, to isolate systems. They were not operational. Obviously, it's a hospital. Like there's patients, people lies at risk potentially. There's a lot of complication to that. And then you get to have that conversation with the decision maker and you explain the silly part, and no one is laughing, right? No one is
No,
gonna
no, not at that moment. They're not.
that we spent X amount of money on this and all this stuff. It's a very awkward conversation to have, right? And there's no playbook to it. Like you can't blame the employee either, right? Like to the extent of their knowledge, they did the best that they thought with the data that was presented to them. And with this, ransomware everywhere, it's easy to just, to be paranoid. So yeah, I absolutely hear you. Like it's a funny story to share in this kind of situation, but when you're actually involved in that and you have to do it, it's not as silly as it sounds.
Yeah, because that was kind of the funny part. We had a great EDR in place, and because it wasn't actually trying to encrypt anything, all it was doing was renaming files. That wasn't in and of itself like a malicious activity. So the EDR didn't care, and yet it still caused havoc from a business operations perspective. So it was just a mess. And to your point, right? We kind of chuckled like, good news, it's not actually ransomware. Like, okay, it kind of they were trying to hold us for ransom, but nothing was encrypted, so we're all right. We still have all the data. We just got to rename it all back. It just nobody realized just how painful that process was going to be. Crazy, crazy stuff.
You know what is like? Oh, another thing that you just kind of reminded me is that back when when I was still part of the incident response team, and we used to do tabletop exercises. One of the scenarios that like pretty much was created by the team was like, hey, you're being ransomed, and someone exfiltrated your data, and now is like trying to extort you. And back in the day, that wasn't at all what was going on. You had like a simple dropper coming from some sort of exploit kit on a single system, encrypting that system. It was annoying, but that was ransomware back in the day.
Yes.
And that evolved more into like threat access being like, hey, I can actually compromise you, move around, go to the domain controller, and then deploy ransomware. And that's probably going to cost you a lot more, and you're going to be a lot more inclined to actually pay me the ransom. And then someone had this amazing idea of like, you know what if we take the data first? And then we're going to actually tell them, like, hey, we're going to release the data until you pay us. Whether we ransom you or not, that's kind of like a secondary thing, but we'll see. But the funny thing is that like we used to run those tabletops like, years before that became a thing. And then that became a thing. And it was kind of like, oh, maybe we'll just stop making those scenarios up because like, we then they became a thing. So it's just kind of like, I'm not claiming that I was one of, I'm not trying to claim that I invented that. It was like another team that was there, but I remember kind of hearing those jokes. And I was like, you know what? Maybe you should stop. Maybe you should.
Yeah, yeah. Let's stop coming up with new and interesting ways that you could be hacked because bad guys must be listening because they immediately do the thing we just came up with. Maybe we should stop coming up with ideas. Maybe that'll actually stop them.
Exactly.
Oh my goodness. So that is wild. Any more crazy stories worth sharing? I don't want to, move on before because this is my favorite part, to be honest.
Feel like I don't have a good way to say, but I feel like I had in some way, I attracted, you know, Chinese nation states, but and I somehow was involved, and then it turns out to be nation state. Like my entire career pretty much started with a Chinese nation state compromising network, and me randomly investigating that. Just because it's actually a funny story. Like we were building completely new capability. We had no tools, nothing. We were just kind of, hey, we're going to build a computer security incident response team. Let's just do it. And we had no budget, no tools. We were just kind of figuring things out. And it was Friday and it was afternoon. And I got a phone call from a random IT admin in Turkey. And he's like, I see a service on my Windows server that I don't recognize. And 9 out of 10 people, probably on Friday afternoon, be like, I have more important things to do. Just kind of like, bye, cool, go investigate whatever. But I asked them for like, hey, can you, I was actually studying for volatility. I started actually the volatility authors. They
Love volatility, by the way.
book. I was like, you know what, like I would actually love to have some practical like snapshots I can play with. So I was like, hey, can you dump me the image of that system? So I have memory because it was a virtual machine. So just dump me the state of the machine. I'll be able to investigate it. And he sent it to me, and I was just literally had my book on my desk. And I was looking at, I'm going to run this command, I'm going to run this command. And then I think it's the chapter about the backdoors, like the kernel level backdoors. And there's a command there that pretty much just enumerates like different drivers and whether they're hooked or not.
Mm-hmm.
Run this command, and I looked into the book, and the book says like, if you see this output, it means that there's this specific backdoor installed on it. And I looked at my screen, I was like, this output looks like this thing in the book.
No.
Like, there's no way, right? It was so kind of like, there's no way. But I started looking more and more into it. I was like, okay, that was an actual thing. And it turns out that it was an entry point, pretty much like all 6 servers with an entry point into a massive network of the service provider, and then to a global conglomerate that they were actually after, right? So they used like the IT provider to go after the organization they wanted. But the funny thing about that was that we had no tools, no budget. We had volatility and like 6 images that we asked for. And we still had more findings than the entire security team of the company that was actually targeted and affected. And there was like a 30 people's team with all the tools and cases, ways, whatever. And I remember that just being like one of those moments was like, you know what? There's power to open source. There's power to sharing. There's power to knowledge sharing, and just people sharing those stories because that ultimately can help someone down the line. So I really don't mind sharing fun stories and ways and tools and things like that because I was on the receiving end of that. And that pretty much, started my career into threat intel, instant response, threat hunting, because from that investigation, I just want to do this all the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, a little bit of an origin story for you.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I love it. Also, a massive fan of volatility. Used it in some Saints courses and then beyond, of course. But it reminds me, we some friends and I used to go round and round, at a bar over beers or whatever, about this very topic because we would see these big companies that we were friends with guys over there, and they would have these super cool tools, right? They cost millions of dollars, and we were super jealous. And I remember we would go back and forth about, yeah, but if all you know how to do is make that tool do its thing, but you don't actually understand what's happening under the covers, like, do you really know how to do security? Like, do you know forensics if all you can do is make encase do its thing, right? Maybe not, and that's because the reality is, and this is where we would go back and forth and say the tools will let you down at some point, right? You're not going to have the agent running on the right system at the right time or whatever. It's on a test system that somehow gets brought into scope of the attack, and it doesn't have the tooling we're used to having. Now you're left with open source tools or things that are easily available off the shelf, and you've got to just figure it out. Now it's just you and a terminal prompt, figure it out, and that's where you really see kind of who the difference between capabilities or skills, and pardon me, and that's what was for me so fun about doing those kinds of things, is because there was and still are, I think even more today, available open source capabilities that can really help you, understand what's going on in an environment, whether that's a system or within a network environment.
Yeah, 100%. And I think you're touching on something extremely important that I had my own number of conversations over beers with my friends about it, but uh to your point, like I never I didn't grow up with, X ways and Ks. I did kind of forensics the hard way by, looking at, hex editor or pretty much using a simple script line tools to go and pull maybe something from registry and then trying to understand what I'm actually looking at. And ultimately, I found that this was like, this was really extremely helpful because I pretty much developed this set of skills that were not bound to a specific tool. I would have 5, 10, 15 different tools that I could achieve the same objective with. And then depending on the use case, I could apply, whatever I needed for the situation that I was handling in that given moment. So that gave me a lot of flexibility. And to your point, like some tools will misparse the data. They will not tell you when they are out. They will, they'll produce an output and they will not really give you the information that you need. And if your trust is in that output or what that tool is giving you, you're gonna miss some stuff. So yeah, being able to like have alternatives, being able to first and foremost, to your point, I think like the most important point is like really understanding how the tool and what the tool is doing, so you can actually do that yourself, and then leveraging the tool more for the automation of it, and really being able to like, so you don't have to repeat those boring manual tasks. That's how you want to think about the problem, and not just approach it from a place like I need a tool, and then whatever tool is telling me, that's what I'm going to apply. Backdoors and pretty much the simplest backdoors in SSH, like the back in the day from the 80s, when you had like a backdoor inside of the SSH daemon that would just hide an inbound connection, is a perfect example of that, right? If you trust the binary that is going to tell you something, there's a way attackers can hide activity from you. And if that's your only way to think about this, then you probably will have some problems down the line.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's also partially why I really like Sans. This is going to sound like some sort of commercial for them. It's not, but what I loved about them is the training that they did. Is most of the tools that we were leveraging in those courses were open source tools, right? They were written by either instructors or other students who were encouraged by like Chad Tilbury, amazing instructor for them. But one of the things he did was say, guys, here are things that aren't well solved today. And he would like challenge every class. Well, every 4 or 5 classes, there's going to be a developer, like a closet developer in there who's actually quite good, who goes, I'll tackle that. And then they build it. And then, a couple of weeks later, you got something worth testing, and you're playing with those things. But even like the beaconing behaviors that you were seeing, right? Like John Strand and and the team over at Black Hills Information Security. I remember when he wrote Rita and was able to capture like beaconing behaviors for the first time, that at least that I was able to find, using the tools that he was building. Just super, super cool stuff. I love the innovation. I love the community, particularly in the digital forensics side of things, because it's so much more tight knit because the mission focus is very linear and well defined. So the cool things that are being built in open source today, just awesome, super cool, especially with the advent of AI and bringing AI and LLMs into the mix. It's so much.
It's so funny you mentioned that. Like, if Chad is ever listening to this, like, sending all the love, because Chad was actually it was my first CrowdStrike recruiter. So Chad was the first
No way.
I spoke to when I was interviewing. Yeah, and he was also one of the big reasons why I was like, I think I'm actually gonna be serious about this. It was like, if he's there, I want to be there. Yeah, they have a phenomenal group of teachers, people who devote in their life to research and really educating, the next generation really of security analysts. When you think about it, pretty much everyone in the SOC IR teams, they probably either used their training or went to their training. So they pretty much educated a generation of the next responders, the SOC analysts. So yeah, kudos to that entire team.
Yeah, because I'm one of them, and it sounds like you are as well. So I mean, that's super cool. Okay, well, we got to move on to more other things. I don't know, there's more interesting things, but other areas. Otherwise, I'd stay here forever. So what's maybe some of the most common misconceptions that you hear about AI in cybersecurity?
Um, that's a good question. I think there's probably two things. The two biggest things. One is that AI is going to replace jobs.
Hmm.
Especially like for SOC analysts, or for security operation centers, autonomous centers, whatever you want to call it, self-driving cars in SOC. But I don't believe that's going to be the case. I think smart people with AI are going to replace some jobs, but AI itself is not going to replace jobs. So to any SOC analysts there, even the L1s who are like being, fearful of the new world that we're stepping into, I don't think that's going to be the case. And I can expand on that even more, but I'm just going to kind of like put a pin on this for now. The second thing that, when it comes to AI based, kind of misleading statements in cyber, it became a buzzword, right? So a lot of organizations claim to be AI native. That is my personal favorite now. Like, everyone used to be doing machine learning, right? That was a thing, and now everyone is AI native. And that's like with every other buzzword, marketing, whatever. Like, that's what people are going to do. I do believe there's not a lot of let me rephrase that. The percentage of companies that are AI native is very small.
Hmm.
The percentage of companies that does ML well is still relatively small. Although everyone is going to tell you that they do it. So I think as someone, whether you're a security operations center analyst, or whether you're some sort of director or decision maker, or someone who's even evaluating tools as part of bigger incentive, don't be afraid to ask difficult questions and challenge any sort of AI capability inside of the product, because I know a number of examples of products and companies that claim to do AI and they have not even the basic model behind the scenes. So that's where we build a certain level of, hey, we do AI, but not really, and then kind of people get burned by it. So those are probably the two biggest misconceptions I would call out here. Maybe a little controversial as well, but that's kind of where I feel like we are kind of from an industry standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's controversial at all. Maybe it's just because I agree. I don't think AI is necessarily taking jobs. I think they're going to take some of the work that we've never enjoyed doing to begin with, in terms of like collecting log data, bringing everything together. Just collecting lots and lots. I heard this phrase, machine sift, and analysts analyze, right, or humans will analyze. That's kind of where we're getting to now. Can it kind of do some triage? Yeah, I think we're getting close to that. But to your point, I don't think it's really taking jobs. Now, what I will say, in terms of AI being the buzzword, no, it's not anymore. It's agentic AI. Piotr. That everything's about AI agents are everywhere. And that's what I keep hearing it's at the conferences I go to. But I had to laugh as you were explaining that because I was at I was at Black Hat Europe last year, and I was walking the floor, and I came across an MDR vendor who shall remain nameless, and they were like, "Hey, we do AI. You know, we're an AI company." I was like, "Great, tell me more." And they're like, "Yeah, it's in everything." I was like, "Okay, like walk me through that." And they said, "Oh yeah, so after an alert fires." And an analyst has completed their investigation, they make a determination and everything's basically done. Then we use AI to help write the report. And I was like, yeah, that's not really AI. Like that's not AI native.
Yeah,
That's it's
if
bolting it
there was,
onto the side.
yeah, if there was a word that describes someone doing the Google search, you could say that when they triage the alert, they Google search the IP and then they got the results. Whatever the buzzword comes in here. But yeah, no, I 100% agree.
Oh my gosh, I just had to let me Google that for you, like flashback as you were talking through that. I mean, yeah, that's not analysis, okay? That's not actual like work. Oh my goodness, it cracks me up. But that's the kind of stuff we're seeing today. So let me shift gears then and look a little more forward and ask like what new or unexpected threat techniques have surfaced in 2025 that concern you? Like you're at the forefront of this in threat intel.
I think there's couple of things that concern me. Um, where do I begin? I'm going to start with my favorite one, and we actually because we're friends and we talk quite a lot. We talked
Mhm.
about it just the other day. I think what North Koreans brought to the table with the remote IT scam is something that concerns me, but not specifically to what they did, as much as like the technique that they showcase and the gaps that they showcased in terms of how easy it is to do what they do. And for anyone who might not know the context behind what I'm saying is North Korean actors pretty much exploit the concept of remote workforce. They started pretty much interviewing with companies and getting hired as employees, and then they sit and collect paychecks, and then that pretty much is one way how they can go and fund that money back to their government. So they pretty much became a malicious insider. The gaps that they expose are very much specific to the hiring process, right? The lack of any sort of professional or maybe proper screening, the lack of vetting the documents, and a lot of the basic issues that someone with a fake driving license can pretty much land a job in big enterprises in the US. So that's a big of a that's a gap and that's a problem. That's not an easy problem to solve because it's more of a process problem, not a technological problem. I mean, there's a bunch of technologies you can use, but at the same time, it sounds like there's a lot more of a process that needs to be improved, and people would actually focus on that problem to solve that. But the part that concerns me about that more is that one of the two things that they do is they do use deepfakes as part of their interviews, and those defects are not perfect, but they will get better. And once they get better, it's going to be extremely difficult to spot that you're actually speaking to a deepfake, a North Korean actor that will have a perfect English accent, right? Similar to how we used to spot a business email compromise because
Mhm.
grammar just didn't line up. With deepfakes, we can still hear accent, we can still hear words. The words don't line up with what you hear and with what you see, but that will get better. And when that gets better, that kind of attack surface is going to get extremely interesting. But the other aspect is that North Koreans didn't really use that for majority of it to do anything malicious. It was more to collect, the funds. But if you think about like nation states leveraging the same approach to get access to networks, systems, and organizations of around the world, and then be able to perform any sort of activity. Think about ransomware actors. Why wouldn't ransomware actors now do the same thing? Why wouldn't they get hired and then pretty much ransom you from the inside as a malicious insider? I hope I'm not creating a new scenario here to what we're discussing, but that door is wide open, right? We've heard about shiny hunters and others like pretty much offering briberies of Scattered Spider to employees so they would give them access. I do believe that CrowdStrike even was affected by that, in the last month or so when they published that like one of the employees actually gave access to their SSO because they were offered some money or whatever. I don't even remember the specific details there, but it was something along the lines of the use case of like pretty much bribing your employee. But what if you just start hiring those folks, right? That's another aspect of that. Like, what if that kind of like shift goes this way? So that concerns me because I don't think we solved the problem since North Korea started doing that. I don't think there's a lot of solutions to that problem just yet on the table. And that pretty much is an open door to other threat actors to leverage that for completely different purposes. So that's one big thing that concerns me. The other thing that concerns me is I mentioned, I think this couple of months ago that like you know, agentic AI is like another buzzword, but that kind of brings two different concerns that I have. One, obviously, agents will ultimately start performing intrusions, and I think Anthropic dropped this phenomenal report. Phenomenal. They have not shared all the details. That's why the industry kind of pushed back on their claims. But they did mention how they, Chinese nation state leverage their models and abuse their models to pretty much, operationalize full intrusion lifecycle. It's not really new for us to hear that nation states are leveraging AI. If there was anyone, why wouldn't they? They're probably the ones who actually innovate. What can we do with that? But being able to use that for an automation in an almost like in a fully autonomous way or close to autonomous is concerning, because once we get to that point, the pace of the intrusion is going to be beyond what we're currently able to detect, prevent, and respond to with our traditional approaches. And then the flip side to that, that the more companies put those agents in, and the more we give those agents the ability to perform autonomous decisions, without proper controls in place, without ability to really maintain the security of those agents, we're kind of opening ourselves up to a very interesting world. So when it comes to the agentic AI, like those are like my two concepts there. And beyond that, I can speak to email side of things and all the things we're seeing there, mostly because of what I see out of normal. But one other thing that I'm going to mention is that I think what attackers do after they get access to the environment and how they get access to the environment. One of the shifts that I think is concerning to me is the supply chain, the third party, ultimately the compromises of partners, security vendors, and vendors themselves to then attack individuals inside of the organizations, because those are extremely difficult to detect as well. Those trends of we're not really seeing attackers walking away from email. They're still leverage email as that initial point of access, but also that additional focus on integrations, SaaS applications, stealing tokens, walking away more from credential towards token, and then leveraging tokens, and malicious apps, and any sort of integration between SaaS applications. That becomes an extremely interesting problem to solve as well. So there's a number of areas where I don't think we have a good answer for that just yet. And obviously, AI is making it extremely difficult for us to predict where that's going to go and how quickly we're going to get there.
Yeah. I do want to go back for a moment to the North Korean actors that are applying for and interviewing for roles, because you and I were you alluded to it, but we were just talking about this yesterday on a side thing. And I was kind of surprised because, like many folks as a security guy, I'm like, oh man. So as soon as they get in, their goals are to, start exfiltrating data or attacking our customers or whatever the goals are when they get into these. But you corrected and said that's actually not it right now, at least. Tell me more about what the goals are, because it's less complicated, it's less malicious necessarily than that, at least for now. What are they trying to do?
Yeah, mostly right now, based on what we're seeing, based also on some of the intelligence that is kind of floating around between different teams and different individuals who are involved in this investigation across many different companies. Most of this is really focused on monetizing on that access. So ultimately, they're getting those jobs, and they, when you think about it, those are AI jobs, engineering jobs, DevOps jobs. Those are pretty well paid 5-figure jobs. So ultimately, they get a number of those jobs, and then they operate inside of that company by pretty much becoming a normal employee and collecting paychecks. And then that's one of the ways how they can fund and provide additional stream of revenue to the government that is behind this entire campaign. And North Koreans had in many different ways how they would fund their operations through cyber intrusions. They've historically been involved in, cryptocurrency hacks. They've been involved in Swift hacks and really touching the money and being able to fund that money somehow back, because that the cyber operations has been one of the ways they've been funding pretty much the stability of the government. So that became another way for them to generate a stream of revenue, thanks to the amazing American economy and the businesses that work here to be able to leverage that to bring that money back.
Okay, and so I wanna unpack this just a hair more because I was shocked at the other aspect of this. So, what I hear you saying is they're getting these jobs to collect the paycheck. So they aren't actually doing the job, they're just collecting the paycheck, right? But you said, "No, they're actually doing the job and doing it well," right?
There's some in some cases, like those employees were hired for months. In some cases, they were hired for even longer. So there's some there's an indication in that in of itself that, like, either you hire someone and you never check on them and somehow they manage to float for a year and you just pay them, which is probably unlikely to some extent, maybe somewhere, but still unlikely. But there's also been some signals that pretty much indicate that, like, when those situations are being handled, those are employees. They actually perform their jobs, and they do that job, in a decent way, to a point that, like, they're being good employees. So it's not as simple as, like, I'm just gonna get in, you know, hope I'm gonna stay there for 30 days, collect my first paycheck, and run away. But if you think about the scale of it, like, if they get 3, 4, 5, we see the same individual getting, like, being hired by maybe 3 or 4 different organizations. That starts adding up.
Yeah, good point. And you had mentioned, specifically that when at least for some companies that we had observed some unusual behavior, reached out to companies and said, "Hey, we want to let you know we feel like there may be something amiss with one of your workers." And like the managers when they were like, "Oh yeah, it turns out that's a North Korean actor. We actually have to fire that person." They were like disappointed because that person was one of the best performers on their team. Can you tell me more about that?
It's like the the part of that I think is it's worth highlighting here, really, is like the fact that, like, when we don't know exactly how they structured that on their side, right? Like, we can have some suggestions and suspicions. I don't personally think that, like, the people who are interviewing are the same people who are then performing the actual jobs and tasks. So when you think about the capabilities of some of the operators who perform intrusions, if it happens that those will be the same individuals who are then becoming engineers on your within your environment, I would think that their skill set is extremely high. So the value that they can provide to those organizations is probably also pretty good. And therefore, the people that they report to probably are really happy about the value of the work that they provide. So yeah, absolutely.
That's crazy to think about that we hired a company might hire a North Korean threat actor, who is just fraudulently gaining access to do the work, but then does such a great job that when they find out, they're like, "Shoot,
Yeah.
they this was one of our best performers in terms of the quality code, the amount of code that they were able to produce." And then are frustrated when they have to fire him because now they gotta go out and find a regular real employee.
Well, they can always offer them a remote position, make it legal. I guess it's always a decision that they.
Goodness gracious. Oh my gosh. Yeah, we were talking about this yesterday with our boss Mike, and he was also sharing some opinions on this, feeling like in many cases the because we've observed lots of uh, applications that appear to have come from North Korean threat actors, and we're starting to flag those and actually conduct the interviews anyway. And I think you've been a part of a few of those. I know our boss Mike has done a bunch of them, and he said it's really interesting though. The information that they can get out of this and then share that with leaders. But he believes that the folks that are interviewing, to your point, aren't necessarily the ones doing the work. These are almost like it's a cellular like terrorist groups. It's a cellular organization where, oh, these are basically the SDRs. They apply for jobs and then interview for them, and then if they get the job, then that's a different group that actually performs the work, and then all of the money is funneled back to North Korea to fund their operations.
Yeah, like I said, I don't have specific details on that to confirm or deny it. But one thing from my own experience I can share with you is that I run into similar problem or similar observation with some of the Chinese threat actors. Because one time, going back to the stories, I had a privilege of working with an organization that was pretty much compromised by China for a very long time, and I was with their security team on site, pretty much working every day. And they got to the point that they would just monitor which systems they would compromise on a given day. And the Chinese threat actor pretty much used their network as a training ground, or what looked like a training ground for some of their analysts. So you would see, for instance, on a given day that you would have someone who was like literally struggling to move laterally from system A to B. And it was like net space use, question mark, trying to figure out like, well, how do I write that command? What's the syntax? And then the next day you will see, someone like pretty much blowing for those systems like crazy. And it almost felt like you had like an L1 analyst, sitting there learning from a script, like this is how I do it. And then you would have like an L3 probably doing like a little presentation to everyone. Hey, here's how you do it.
God.
So, we've been watching for like months. It's been eye opening, and I can envision like a SOC in China to some extent where you have this pretty much like folks in their uniforms performing those actions, and and tooling and capabilities and escalations and all this stuff. So yeah, why not? Why not North Korea? That would work too.
Okay, I have to ask. I'm just morbidly curious. Have you ever seen anybody reference the man pages? Bad actor reference the man pages. They're in there. They're like net, use, shoot. I can't remember which switch is it to. Let me man this.
No, not my pages. I think so the windows of like the question mark when I list the list
Fair
command.
enough.
I didn't see it like with map pages. No. See
Got it.
this
Okay.
in this day and age, like with ChatGPT, like it would just give you all the
Well,
all
yeah.
the
Fair
commands,
point.
so you don't even have to do it yourself. So yeah, it's yeah, you don't get the same level of intimacy with the threat actor anymore.
That's funny, but that would crack me up if you watched a threat actor like stumble through and have to reference the man pages again, showing my age a little bit. Yes, exactly. I love it. All right, Pio, this has been such a fun conversation. I'm so grateful. But here's the thing, right? We've had a good almost an hour of a great chat. Not everybody could take everything away, but if someone, what would you have someone take away as one main point to take away from our conversation today?
I think what I'm gonna go with is as this is, as we're talking about security operation centers, and hopefully like, a lot of the audience that is following this is also like naturally part of that. What I'm gonna say is that like I do think we live in the extremely exciting times. Because what used to be pretty much unavailable to me without proper degree, without years of learning, without a number of books and extreme amount of time that I have to devote to learn, is now available at the fingertips of your command and of your prompt, with pretty much LLMs. So ultimately, you don't have an excuse today to not live to your greatest potential. Like you can really do amazing things, being supported by AI, and really leverage AI to like elevate your game to the next level. Elevating your game to the next level with AI and with your potential, like that is only going to make all of us safer. Use this technology, leverage this technology, learn from it, work with it, partner with it. You can build tools, you can build capabilities, you can ask it questions that you would normally have to have teachers and mentors for to ask. Like you can literally elevate your game in a ways that was not previously possible, and it just makes such a big difference at the end of the day. So don't be afraid of it, leverage it, and you will make yourself successful, make your security program successful, and you will make this entire world more secure. So do that.
I love it. You heard it here, folks, from Pio. Don't be afraid of AI. Use it. Use it for everything. It's incredibly powerful and can help you level up your game. So, Piotr, I just want to say thank you so much for being on the show. This has been a blast. What an amazing conversation that we've had. So, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Well, folks, this has been another episode of SOC Unlocked, Tales from the Cybersecurity Frontline. I'm your host, Mick Leach, reminding all you cyber defenders out there to keep fighting the good fight. You're the tip of the spear, so stay sharp. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to like and subscribe and check out our other SOC Unlocked episodes. We'll see you all next time. Until then, have a great day.